The dust on Tessera 9 came in 3 colors, and none of them were kind. Cal Renner walked the rim road in the pale one, the bone color, the morning color, the color that lay across the flats before the sun crawled high enough to redden it. He walked with his left boot dragging a quarter-inch behind his right, the way a man walks when his hip has been wrong for 30 years, and he has decided to stop apologizing to it. His rifle hung muzzle down across his back. A canvas pack on one shoulder, a tin flask in the chest pocket of his coat, a half-burned photograph folded once and tucked inside the flask's leather sleeve so the heat of his own body would not unfold it. He did not look at it anymore. He carried it the way other men carried scars. The radio in his shack had been on when he left. He had not turned it off. It was a stupid old thing with a cracked dial face, scavenged from a colony lifter that crashed before he was born, and it picked up the VOR broadcasts because the VOR broadcasts were the only signals strong enough to push through the iron in the hills. He had been hearing their language for 2 decades. He had learned to understand maybe 1 word in 12. It was enough. That morning, the radio had said a word he understood. Unsung. It was the word the VOR used for one of theirs they had decided to stop counting. He had heard it twice before on this moon. The first time he had gone out to look, because he was younger then and curiosity had not yet been burned out of him, and he had found a small dry shape in a culvert north of the salt pan, four-eyed, folded in on itself, its long arms tucked the way a child tucks them in sleep. The VOR had left it there to be taken back by the carrion drones. The drones had not yet come. He had buried it himself, because that was the kind of thing a man did when nobody else was looking, and he had not told anyone, because there was no one to tell. The second time he had not gone out. He had sat at the table with the flask and let the broadcast play and listened to the long silence afterward, and he had felt the shape of his own cowardice settle in him like a stone in a well. Today the broadcast had said unsung and then a coordinate string, and the coordinate string had been close. Close enough to walk. Close enough that not walking would mean choosing not to walk, and Cal Renner had decided some years ago that he was done with the kind of choice that looked like nothing. So he walked. The flats rose into ridges of pale rock around the 8th kilometer, the kind of rock that flaked under your boot and made a sound like dry paper tearing. The sun cleared the eastern ridge and began doing its slow conversion of the dust from bone to ash to rust. By the time he reached the ravine, the world was the color of an old penny. He smelled her before he saw her, not bad, not death. The VOR smelled like cut grass and something sweeter beneath, a smell that made you think of a kitchen where someone was baking with herbs you did not know. It was an alien smell. It was also a living one. That was the thing that made him stop on the rim of the ravine and listen to his own breathing for a moment before he went down. She was at the bottom against the western wall where the shadow would last longest into the day. She had arranged herself. That was what struck him first, that she had arranged herself, knees folded, arms crossed at the wrists in her lap, the long second pair of arms folded behind her against her back the way the VOR folded them in repose, her head tilted slightly forward so her chin rested against her thorax. Her 4 eyes were closed, all 4. The 2 large ones above and the 2 small ones below, all sealed, the membranes flat and still. She had done this herself. She had walked down here, found the longest shadow, sat down and closed her eyes, and she was waiting. He stood at the bottom of the ravine and looked at her for a long time. The wind moved in the upper rocks and made a sound like something breathing in another room. The carrion drones had not come yet. They would. The VOR would have logged the coordinates and the drones would be on their slow patrol, and within the day, maybe 2, they would arrive and do what they were built to do. He saw her chest move. Once, the long, slow inhale of a VOR at rest. He had read that they could slow themselves down nearly to stopping, that this was the ritual. That the unsung were meant to do the thing themselves, to let the heart wind down like a clock unwound, so that when the drones came, there would only be the body, and the body would have done the work of becoming a body on its own. He thought about the dry, small shape in the culvert. He thought about the table and the silence and the stone in the well. He stepped closer. His boot displaced a flake of pale rock that fell 6 inches and made a tiny dry sound, and the chitin plates at the back of her neck flexed once, the smallest movement, the kind that says I heard that and I am pretending I did not, and went still again. She did not open her eyes. She had made her decision about her eyes and she was keeping it. He crouched, his bad hip complained. He set the rifle down on the rock beside him, not to draw it, just to put it where his hands were not on it. He thought about what to say. He had spent 2 decades learning her language 1 word in 12, and the words he had were not the words for this. The words for this did not exist in either of their languages, probably. He had a feeling about that. So he said the thing in his own tongue, quiet, almost under his breath, the way you say a thing to a horse that has been standing in the rain too long. Come with me. Her eyes did not open. He waited. The wind worked the upper rocks. Somewhere far off, a thermal began to lift, and he felt it on the back of his neck as a thinning of the air. Come with me, he said again. I have a place, it's not much, it's warm at night. The radio's loud, but you can turn it down. Nothing. He looked at the way she had folded her arms. The 2 front pairs were crossed in her lap, the wrists laid one over the other in a particular pattern. He had seen that pattern once before, in a book a Vor trader had let him page through at the spaceport. It was the asterisk gesture of having finished asterisk. It was what you did when you were done. He understood then that she was not going to come, that she had not arranged herself in the ravine to be saved, that she had walked here and sat down because this was what her people did, and what her people did was the only thing she knew how to do, and the part of her that might have wanted something else had been quieted long before she ever made it to the bottom of the ravine. He sat down. He sat down on the rock beside the rifle, and he uncorked the flask, and he took a swallow, and he did not say anything for a while. The sun rose. The shadow against the western wall began to shorten. A small pale insect crawled over the toe of his boot and went away. After some time, he began to talk. He did not talk to her. He talked the way a man talks when he is alone and has been alone too long. He talked about the shack and about the dog that had died 2 years ago, and about how he still set out water for it some mornings and had to pour the water back into the tank when he caught himself. He talked about the outer belt conflict, and about a medic named Hoyt who had taught him to set a femur with a length of pipe and 3 strips of webbing, and about how Hoyt had died not of anything dramatic, but of an infection from a cut on his thumb, 3 weeks after the ceasefire, in a hospital that had run out of the right antibiotic. He talked about his sister Alyssa, who had been 11 years old when she drowned in a reservoir outside a town he no longer drove through, and about how he had not been able to say her name out loud for 19 years, and then one day in a bar on Heliope, he had said it and nothing happened, and he had been disappointed by that, because he had wanted something to happen, and the thing that finally happened was that he understood nothing was going to. He talked for maybe an hour, the shadow shortened, the sun climbed. At some point, he did not see the exact moment because he had been watching the rim of the ravine and not her face. At some point, one of her small lower eyes opened. Just one, just a slit. The membrane peeled back maybe a millimeter. He saw it because the inside of a Vor eye was a wet pale green, and the wet pale green caught the morning light and held it. He did not look at her directly. He kept talking. He talked about a song his mother used to hum while she did the dishes, a tune so old he did not know the words anymore, only the shape of it, the 4-note rise and the long sigh down. He hummed it. He hummed the 4 notes badly and the long sigh worse, and his voice cracked on the second pass, and he laughed a little at himself, because he had not heard his own laugh in a long time and the sound surprised him. The second small eye opened. He let it, he did not turn his head. He He took another swallow from the flask and capped it and set it on the rock and said, more to the rock than to her, "I'm going back up to the rim now. I'm going to walk slow. If you want to come, you come. If you don't, I'll sit up there for a while and then I'll walk home and that'll be the end of it." He stood, his hip complained. He picked up the rifle and slung it muzzle down. He climbed the ravine wall slowly with his hand on the rock for balance. At the rim he sat down on a flat ledge and did not look back. The sun was high. The dust had reached its rust color. Somewhere over the western horizon he could hear the first thin whine of a drone on patrol, very faint, very far, but present. He waited. He had been ready to wait a long time. He had not brought a watch and he had not brought a plan beyond the words "come with me," and he understood that the words had been all he had, and he understood that words like that did not always work, and he understood that he was going to sit on this ledge until either she came up or the drone came in, and he was prepared to be wrong about which. He was wrong about which. She came up the ravine wall behind him with a sound so soft it was barely a sound at all, the dry slide of chitin on pale rock, the careful placement of long jointed fingers in the cracks he had used himself. He did not turn. He heard her stop a few feet behind him. He heard her breathing that long slow inhale, but quicker now, ragged at the edges, the breath of a body that had been told to stop and had decided not to. "Slow walk back," he said to the horizon. 3 hours, there's water at the shack, there's a chair if you want one. The radio, I'll turn the radio off. He stood, he started walking. He did not look behind him. After 10 steps he heard her follow. It took 4 hours, not 3. He had forgotten about his hip. She did not complain. She did not, as far as he could tell, do anything other than walk a careful 8 paces behind him, in his shadow when his shadow was long enough and in the dust beside it when it was not. Once, when he stopped to drink, she stopped too and stood very still, the way a deer stands. When he started again, she started again. They did not speak. He was not sure she could speak in any language he would understand. He had heard the Vorsing talk on the radio for 20 years, and he could no more reproduce their sound than he could whistle backwards. The shack came up out of the flats around the 4th hour, a low square of corrugated panels the color of weathered iron, the roof patched with a sheet of solar fabric that flapped at one corner because he had been meaning to fix it for 2 seasons. The dog's water dish was still on the step. He had forgotten to pour it back that morning. He opened the door. He stood aside. He did not invite her in with a gesture because he did not know what gesture would translate. He just stood aside. She looked at the door. She looked at him. The 4 eyes worked independently, 2 on the door, 2 on his face. He held very still and let her look. Then she folded her long arms close to her sides, the way a person makes themselves smaller to pass through a narrow gap, and she went in. He went in behind her and shut the door and locked it. The first night he did not sleep. He sat in the chair by the table, the lamp turned low, the radio off, the rifle across his knees with the safety on. She sat in the corner farthest from the door, on the floor in the same folded posture she had taken in the ravine, knees up, front arms crossed, second arms folded behind. But her eyes were open, all 4. She watched him and she watched the door and she watched the small high window where the moonlight came through, and she did not sleep either as far as he could tell. The Vor might not sleep the way humans did. He did not know. There were a lot of things he did not know. Around midnight he stood up slowly and went to the cupboard and took out the tin of dried protein and a tin of the syrup-soaked grain pellets the spaceport traders sold as Vor feed. Because once, years ago, a Vor deckhand had come through with the iron caravan, and he had bought a tin out of curiosity and had never opened it and had kept it in the cupboard because he was a man who kept things. He opened it now. The smell that came out was the cut grass smell, sharper, the way a kitchen smells when you finally pull the pan off the heat. He set the tin on the floor halfway between his chair and her corner. He went back to the chair. He sat down. She looked at the tin for a long time, then she looked at him. He said, "It's yours, I don't eat that." She did not move. Then very slowly she reached out with one of her front arms. The joints worked in 3 places where his worked in 2, and the motion had a smoothness that reminded him of something underwater, and she picked up the tin and drew it back to her corner, and she did not eat. She held it. She held it for an hour. Then she set it down beside her, untouched, and folded her arms again. He understood, or thought he did. He had read once that the Vor did not eat alone. That eating was a brood activity, a thing you did at the long, low tables in the hive houses, with your kin around you, and to eat alone was the gesture of I am no longer of the brood. The unsung did not eat. That was part of how they did the thing themselves. He did not know what to do with that information. He sat with it. After a while he reached into the cupboard and took down a piece of bread he had baked 3 days ago, and he tore it in half, and he set half on his side of the table and the other half on the corner of the table closest to her. And he ate his half slowly, chewing with his mouth closed, watching the lamp. He did not look at her. When he had finished his half, he sat with his hands folded on the table and he waited, and after a long time, after the moonlight on the high window had shifted by a hand's width, he heard the smallest sound from the corner. A dry click, the Vor equivalent, maybe, of clearing the throat. And then the soft slide of chitin on the floor, and the long, careful movement of her crossing the room, and the sound of one of her hands picking up the half-loaf from the corner of the table. She did not sit at the table. She took the bread back to her corner and ate it there slowly in small bites, and she made a sound while she ate, a low 3-note hum, almost too quiet to hear, like a person humming a tune to themselves while they worked. It was not the 4-note tune his mother had hummed. It was something else, something Vor, something he had no reference for at all. But it was a hum. It was the sound a thing makes when it has decided, against everything, to keep being a thing for a little longer. He turned off the lamp. He sat in the dark and listened to her hum until she finished the bread, and then she was quiet. And then after a while he heard the change in her breathing that meant she had folded down into something like sleep, and he sat with the rifle across his knees until the dawn came up gray through the high window. He did not sleep either, but for the first time in 2 years he did not want to. He went to the outpost on the 3rd day. He had to. The protein tin was getting low and he had 2 tins of Vor feed left, and he did not know how long this was going to last, and he was not in the business anymore of failing to prepare. The outpost was 40 kilometers north along the Rim Road, a cluster of prefab habs around a fuel depot, run by a wiry woman named IMO Vass, who had been there longer than anyone could remember, and who asked no questions of anyone who paid in scrip. He told the Vor he could not bring himself to think of her by a name yet, though the name was already there in the back of his throat. Waiting, he told her in his own language slowly with gestures that he was going out and would come back. He did not know how much she understood. She watched him pack. She watched him take the rifle. When he reached the door she made a sound, a short 2-note thing falling, and he stopped. He looked at her. She had folded her front arms over her thorax in a way he had not seen before. He did not know what it meant. He said, "I'll come back." He locked the door behind him. He walked the 40 kilometers in 7 hours. He was tired and his hip hurt, and he did not stop except to drink. And when he came up over the last rise and saw the outpost in the wash of afternoon light, he understood that he was walking faster than he had walked in years. IMO Vass was on the porch of the supply hab, smoking the long dry cigarettes she rolled herself out of leaf paper. She watched him come up the steps. "Renner," she said. "IMO. You look like a man with an errand." "I have one." She took the cigarette out of her mouth and tapped the ash off the porch rail. "Inside." He bought what he needed, protein. A second tin of Vor feed, then a third. Then he hesitated and put the third back and then took it again. A spool of insulation wire. A new battery for the lamp. He paid in scrip, and he did not meet Imo's eye when he set the vor feed on the counter, and Imo did not say anything about it, but she pulled a fourth tin off the shelf and set it next to his pile, and she said, "On the house. I got too many. They don't move." He looked at her. She looked back. Her face had the kind of stillness that takes a lifetime to learn. "Thank you," he said. He was at the door when she said, "Renner." He stopped. "There's a flight in tomorrow. Vor cargo runner. They sometimes ask after strays." He did not turn. "They ask," she said, "and I tell them I haven't seen anything because I haven't. I'm telling you so you can stop being seen if you need to." He stood at the door for a moment. Then he nodded without turning, and he went out. He walked the 40 kilometers back through the night. He did not stop. The two moons of Tessera 9 came up an hour apart and rolled across the sky and went down again, and somewhere around the third hour after the second moon set, he saw the shack squat low against the flats in the false dawn, and he stopped on the rise above it and stood for a full minute just looking. The shack was dark. He had told himself she might have gone. He had told himself a lot of things on the walk back. He had told himself it would be a relief if she had gone, because it would mean the choice was made, and the consequence was over, and he could go back to being a man who set water out for a dog who had been dead 2 years. He did not feel relieved. He felt the stone in the well start to move. He went down the rise. He unlocked the door. He went in. She was in the corner. The 4 eyes opened in the dim and caught the false dawn light and held it. She had not moved. She had perhaps not moved in the 7 hours and the 7 hours back and however long he had stood on the rise. There was a tin on the floor beside her, opened, half finished. She had eaten. She had eaten alone in a stranger's shack, and she had not died of it. He understood, looking at her, that this was a thing she had decided, the way he had decided about her in the ravine, and the cost of it would be hers to carry. He set the pack down. He sat in the chair. He looked at her. She looked at him. He said, "I'm going to call you Alyssa." The 4 eyes did not change. "I had a sister with that name," he said. "She died a long time ago. I'm not trying to make you her. I just don't have another name for you yet, and I don't think your name would fit in my mouth. So, Alyssa, for now." She tilted her head, the small movement, the listening one. She made the dry click, the clearing of throat sound. And then, in a voice that was 3 voices at once and none of them quite the same, the Vor had a triple vocal cord. He remembered now. They could speak in chord. She said the word back to him. Alyssa. It was not the way his sister had said it. It was not the way he had said it. It was its own thing. It was a song with 3 notes in it that did not exist in any human throat. He sat in the chair, and he did not say anything because he could not. And after a moment she folded her arms in a new pattern he had not seen before, a pattern he would not understand for some weeks, the pattern that meant "I have heard you and I am here." The storm came on the 4th night. He had felt it building all day, the pressure dropping like a man sitting down slowly into a chair. The light gone strange, a flat brass color through the high window, the color the dust turned just before the dust started moving in earnest. He had been on Tessera 9 long enough to know a wall storm when he felt one in the small bones of his face, and he had been outside checking the solar fabric for the 3rd time that afternoon when he turned and saw it in the south, a long low ridge of rust that was not a ridge. He came inside fast. He shut the storm shutters over the high window and clamped them. He pulled the rug across the gap under the door and weighted it with a length of pipe. He checked the seals on the kettle and the water tank. He pulled the battery off the lamp and set it in a tin, because the iron in a wall storm could pull the charge right out of an exposed cell, and he had lost 2 lamps that way in his first year on the moon and had not made the mistake since. Alyssa watched him from the corner. The 4 eyes worked on his hands. He said, "Storm, big one, will be in here for a day, maybe 2. She tilted her head, the listening one. "It's all right," he said. "It's a thing the moon does, the shack holds. You stay inside, you don't go to the door." The dust goes sideways and it cuts. He demonstrated with his hand, a flat sideways motion through the air, then a small grimace, the universal gesture for asterisk bad. She made the same motion back to him, in miniature, with the long jointed fingers of her front arm, and then she folded her arms close to her sides, and she went still in the way she went still when she was preparing to wait. The storm arrived an hour later. There was no graduating into it. There was the small dry sound of a sand grain hitting the shutter, and then a moment of silence as if the moon had taken a breath, and then the wall hit the shack and the shack moved. Not far, an inch maybe. The corrugated panels groaned along the seams. The pipe under the rug clattered once and then was pressed flat by the wind shoving in under the door. The lamp on the table, the unpowered one, the candle lamp he kept for the storms, guttered, because the seal under the door was never quite perfect. The sound was the worst of it. It was not a roar. A roar would have been bearable. It was a long, high, sustained scream, the scream of trillions of small, sharp things moving past a thin wall faster than they had any business moving, and the scream was layered with the dry crackle of the larger grains hitting the shutter and the lower thrum of the panels in their frames, and the three sounds together made a music that the body did not know how to listen to. The body wanted to leave the body. That was the truest thing he could have said about a wall storm on Tessera 9. The body wanted to be somewhere else. He had ridden out storms alone for 30 years. He had a routine. He sat in the chair with the candle lamp lit with the flask within reach, and he read a book. He had 3 books, all of them softened to felt at the corners, and he let his mind go somewhere else until the storm had let his body go. That night he could not read. He sat in the chair, he held the book, he did not open it, he kept looking at the corner. Alyssa was not still anymore. She was as still as she could make her body be, which was very still, but the 4 eyes had begun to do a thing he had not seen before, a kind of slow flicker, the upper 2 and then the lower 2, the upper 2 and then the lower 2, as if her body had decided to keep the eyes busy because the rest of her could not be busy. Her front arms were folded across her thorax in a pattern he did not know. Her second arms, the back ones, were braced against the floor behind her in a way that looked to him like a person about to push themselves up and run, except that there was nowhere to run, and she knew there was nowhere to run, and the bracing was therefore the only thing the back arms knew how to do with what they were feeling. He thought, she has never been inside one of these. He thought, she has been inside a hive house all her life. She has been inside thick walls of cut stone with the brood around her and the long, low ceilings overhead, and she has not been alone in a corrugated tin box on a flat moon with a storm hitting it sideways, ever, not once. He thought, she is going to come apart. He set the book down. He stood up. His hip complained. He walked across the room 3 paces, that was all the room was, and he stopped a pace short of her corner and he sat down on the floor. He did not sit close. He sat in the middle of the room, more or less, the candle lamp between them. He sat with his back against the table leg, and he stretched his bad leg out in front of him, and he set the flask on the floor beside him where she could see it. He said over the sound of the storm, "It holds. The shack, 29 years, it holds." She did not move. The 4 eyes flickered. "There was one once," he said, "in the 2nd year, wall storm, 2 days. I was younger then, I was alone well. I had the dog, I had Das. He was a puppy then, he hid under the bed. He shook so hard the bed shook. I thought the shack was coming down, it didn't." The 4 eyes were on his face now, all 4 steady, the flicker had stopped. "And there was one in the 7th year," he said, "when I'd gotten cocky. Storm came up and I was an hour out on the flats. I had to dig a pit and lie in it with my coat over my head. 12 hours. Came home, the shack was fine. Das was sitting on the step waiting. He was old by then, he didn't run to me. He just sat there. He looked at me like I was an idiot, he was right. He took a swallow from the flask, he capped it. And there was one, I don't remember which year, they start to run together. There was one where the wind came in under the door and put the lamp out. The candle lamp, this one, and it was dark for I don't know, a while, and in the dark I started to talk to myself, to Das, to my sister. I talked for a long time, maybe hours. I don't remember what I said. I remember it helped. I remember that when the light came back I felt like I'd been somewhere and come back from it. That's a thing I learned about storms. You go somewhere and you come back. And the going is the storm, and the coming back is the storm ending. And the thing you don't do is stay in the middle and refuse to go anywhere. The shack groaned along its long seam. The candle lamp guttered. He looked at her. I'm going to talk, he said. If that's all right, I'm going to talk until this thing is done. You don't have to listen. You don't have to understand. You can hum, if you want. You can hum at me. I won't know what it means. That'll be all right. That'll be even that way. She was quiet for a moment. The storm pushed against the wall. The whole shack made the long, low note it made when the wind sat on its south side. Then she did a thing he was not expecting. She moved slowly. She unfolded her back arms from their brace, and she unfolded her front arms from her thorax, and she came across the floor toward him in the long underwater gait, on all four arms now, low like a person crawling toward shelter, and she came up to him and she stopped a pace away, and she sat down on the floor beside him with her back against the table leg, the way he was sitting. Not touching, a hand's width between them, but beside him. Her chitin made a small dry sound as she settled. The four eyes closed, all four, and stayed closed. He understood that she had decided something. He did not know what. He did not need to know yet. He talked. He talked for most of the next 11 hours. He did not remember afterward most of what he had said. He remembered a long stretch about a town he had grown up in, the smell of the river in late summer, the names of 3 boys he had played with whose faces he could no longer picture. He remembered telling her about the war, not the parts he usually told, the brave parts, the parts that came out at bars, but the small parts, the part about a stretcher he had carried that had been too heavy, and a thing he had said to the man on the stretcher that had not been kind, that had been impatient, that he had wanted to take back for 30 years and could not. He remembered telling her about his mother's hands, about the way they had smelled near the end, of the lotion the nurse had used, about how he had not been there when she died, about the phone call, about sitting in a parking lot for 2 hours afterward and not being able to put the car in gear. He remembered at some point that she had begun to hum. It was a hum he had not heard her make, not the 3-note thing she did when she ate, not the single sustained note he would come to know later as her grieving sound. This was something longer, a slow rising and falling, a kind of breath made into music, and it was almost in time with the long low note the shack made when the wind sat on its south side. She had taken the sound of the storm against the wall and she had made it into a song. She was doing what her people did, he understood. She was making the brood sound for him. She was singing what her hive house would have sung if her hive house had been here, around the 2 of them, at the long low table in the dark. He did not stop talking. He let his voice fall into the hum the way a hand falls into water that is the right temperature. At some point the storm slacked. It did not stop. It just slacked. The high scream dropped half an octave. The panels stopped groaning. The wind sat down on the moon the way a tired animal sits down. The shack settled. The candle lamp steadied. He stopped talking. She stopped humming. They sat for a long moment in the new quiet. The storm was still out there, still moving, but it had become a thing happening outside the shack instead of a thing happening to the shack, and that was the whole difference. He turned his head to look at her. Her 4 eyes had opened again, slowly, the upper ones first and then the lower ones. They were on his face. He said, "We did the storm." She said, in trade tongue, and this was the first he knew that she had any trade tongue at all, though later he would understand she had been picking it up the way she picked up everything, slowly, in silence, by paying attention, she said, very low in 2 of her 3 voices. "We did the storm." He blinked. He did not say anything. He could not for a moment. She did not say anything else. She turned her face away slowly and folded her arms again, the new pattern, and closed her eyes. He sat against the table leg and watched the candle lamp and listened to the storm winding down outside. And he thought, that is twice now. That is twice in 2 weeks that a thing has happened that I did not know was a thing that could happen. And the world has not stopped. And I have not stopped. And there is a Vor against the table leg beside me with her eyes closed, who has just learned 3 words of trade tongue from listening to a tired man talk for 11 hours about a town that does not exist anymore. He sat with that for a long time. The storm wound down. By dawn it was a thing in the distance, a brass haze on the southern flats. He stood up slowly, because his hip had stiffened, because 11 hours on a floor was 11 hours on a floor, and he limped to the door and he unclamped the shutter on the high window and he looked out. The world had been rewritten. Wall storms did that. The pale flats were a different shape now, the dunes redrawn, his footprints from yesterday wiped clean, the rim road buried where it had been visible the day before. Nothing was where it had been. Nothing was lost exactly, the rocks were the same rocks, but the surfaces had been turned over, and a person walking out now would have to learn the moon again. He thought, looking out at it, that is what is happening to me. He went back to the chair. Alyssa was still against the table leg, her eyes closed, her arms folded in the new pattern. He sat down. He took down the kettle. He boiled water for himself and he opened a tin of Vor feed and he set it on the floor a pace from her, the way he had taken to doing it, halfway between them, the small daily geography that was their version of a brood table. She opened her eyes. She looked at the tin. She looked at him. She did not pick the tin up. She made the gesture instead, the new one. The I have heard you and I am here. She made it with both her front arms slowly, and she held it for a long moment, and then she lowered her arms and she picked up the tin, and she began to eat slowly, with the small spoon in his shack in the morning after the storm, beside a tired man drinking tea from a tin cup with a chip on the rim. He did not say anything. He drank his tea. He watched the brass light come in through the high window. He thought, this is the thing. This is the thing I did not know was a thing. The cleansers came 11 days later. He had been expecting them and not expecting them. There is a kind of waiting that is not really waiting at all. It is the body holding itself ready while the mind walks around pretending to do other things. He fixed the corner of the solar fabric on the roof. He cleaned the rifle. He taught Alyssa, in a slow and partial way, the layout of the shack and the locations of the 3 places under the floor where a person could fit if a person had to. He did not tell her about Emo's warning. He did not need to. She knew, in the way she knew things, that the thing she had walked away from had not stopped walking after her. She had begun, in those 11 days, to do something he was not prepared for. She had begun to be a person. She made the 3-note hum in the mornings, while the kettle boiled. She watched the radio with the curiosity of someone trying to figure out where the small people inside it were hiding. She picked up the half-burned photograph from where it had fallen from the flask one night and she held it up to the lamp and she looked at it for a long time before she folded it once, the way he folded it, and put it back. She did not ask. She did not, he was fairly sure, have the words to ask. But she did the thing he did with it, and that was a kind of asking, and the answer he gave her was to nod once, and to leave it on the table where they could both see it. She tried, on the 7th evening, to teach him a Vor word. She pointed at the lamp. She said a chord 3 notes, the first sharp, the second flat, the third sliding upward. He tried to repeat it. He could only make the first note. She looked at him. The 4 eyes did the thing they did when she was amused, which was to close the small lower ones briefly while keeping the upper ones wide. He laughed. He had not laughed in 2 years, and now he had laughed twice in 2 weeks, and he was not sure what was happening to him, but he was not stopping it. Lamp, he said. She made the chord. Lamp, he said again, and she made the chord, and they looked at each other across the table and neither of them moved for a moment. because something had been agreed on without being spoken, that the lamp would always be two things, his thing and hers, and that neither of them would have to choose. The cleansers came on the morning of the 11th day. He saw them first as dust on the southern horizon. 3 plumes, low and fast, the dust of skimmers. He had been on the step pouring the dog's water back into the tank. He had stopped doing that for 9 days, but he had done it that morning, out of habit or out of nerves. He did not know which, and he saw the plumes, and he stood up very slowly, and he did not spill the water. He went inside. He shut the door, he locked it. Alyssa was at the table. She had taken to sitting at the table in the mornings. She looked up when he came in, and she read his face, and the 4 eyes did the thing they did when she was afraid, which was a flat narrowing of all 4 membranes at once, like 4 small doors closing in the same wind. "Floor," he said, "now the back one under the bed." She did not argue. She did not, he understood later, have a concept of arguing. She stood and she went to the bed and she pulled up the panel he had shown her, and she folded herself into the space beneath, and she folded smaller than he had thought she could, and he put the panel back, and he kicked the rug over it, and he sat down at the table and he picked up the half-burned photograph and he put it back in the flask, and he picked up the flask and he took a swallow, and he uncocked the rifle and laid it across his knees and he waited. The skimmers came in fast and they came in loud. They circled the shack once, low, and the dust they kicked up turned the morning the rust color 2 hours early. Then they landed, and the engines wound down, and there was the long ticking silence of cooling metal, and then the knock on the door. It was a real knock. 3 soft taps, polite, the way a Vor trader would knock at a spaceport hostel. The Vor were not, as a rule, a rude people. They had not come here to be rude. They had come here to do a thing, and the thing they had come to do did not require rudeness, because the thing they had come to do had already been decided by people much higher than the ones at his door. He opened the door. There were 3 of them, tall, taller than Alyssa by a head. Their chiton was the dark blue-black of the cleanser caste, with the pale notches along the throat that meant office of the quiet day. They wore no weapons that he could see. The cleansers did not need weapons, in the same way a riptide does not need weapons. They did the thing they did with their bodies and with their authority, and that was enough. The lead one was the tallest. He, Cal, assumed the Vor did not, as far as he understood, distinguish gender in their cleanser caste, but his brain wanted a pronoun. He made the formal greeting chord, the 4-note one that meant I greet you in peace and in service. Cal nodded. The cleanser spoke in trade tongue, slow and careful. Human, we track an unsung, the trace ends in this place. I see. You have seen her. It was not a question, exactly. It was the form a cleanser used when it was offering you a chance to confirm what it already knew. Cal looked at the cleanser. He looked at the 2 behind him. He looked at the skimmers behind those, with their idle engines and their pale-notched throats. He said, I saw her in a ravine 11 days ago. The cleanser tilted its head. The motion was the same one Alyssa made when she was listening. He noticed it. He filed it away. You saw her, the cleanser said, and I left her there. The cleanser was silent for a moment. Then it said, the trace ends here. The trace is wrong. The trace is not wrong. The trace is wrong, Cal said, and he kept his voice level, and he kept his hands on the rifle in his lap where the cleanser could see them, and he kept his eyes on the cleanser's chest plate because he had read once that direct eye contact with a cleanser was a challenge. I was in that ravine. I sat there for an hour. I walked back. My boots are in your trace. She is not. The cleanser looked past him into the shack. The 4 eyes worked independently, the upper ones on the room, the lower ones on his face. He understood that he had perhaps a count of 10 before the cleanser decided which of 2 things to do. He said, you can come in. The cleanser's head tilted again. He had surprised it. You can come in and look. I have nothing. I am a man who lives alone on a moon nobody wants. I saw a thing in a ravine and I left it there because it was not my thing. If your trace ends here, it ends here because I walked through it on my way home. Come in." He stood up. He stood aside. He kept the rifle in his hand, muzzle down, the way a man holds a tool he is not using. The cleanser came in. The other two stayed at the door. The lead cleanser walked the room. Slowly. The four eyes worked over everything: the table, the chair, the radio, the cupboard, the bed. Cal stood in the middle of the room and did not move. He breathed slowly. He thought about Hoyt and about the femur and about the way Hoyt had taught him that the body would do the thing it had to do as long as the mind stayed out of its way. The cleanser stopped at the bed. It looked at the bed, it looked at the rug, it looked at Cal. Cal said, "It's a bed." The cleanser made a small sound, a two-note thing, not a chord, something more like a sigh. Then it bent down. The long jointed body folded with the same underwater smoothness Alyssa's body had, and it touched the rug lightly, with one finger. Cal's hand tightened on the rifle. He did not raise it. He kept it muzzle down. He thought about how long it would take to bring it up. He thought about the two at the door. He thought about Alyssa under the floor, her four eyes shut, her arms folded in the asterisk gesture of having finished, because of course she would do that. Of course she would have folded into the asterisk gesture of having finished the moment the panel went over her, because she did not know any other way to be ready. The cleanser straightened up. It looked at Cal for a long moment. The four eyes worked over his face, the upper ones on his eyes, the lower ones on his mouth, on his hands, on the rifle. It said in trade tongue, very quietly so that the two at the door would not hear, "What is on the table?" Cal looked. The half-loaf of bread from breakfast, his tin cup, the photograph refolded in its leather sleeve leaning against the flask, and the third tin of vor feed, open, half-finished, a vor-shaped spoon resting in it. He had not put it away. She had been eating when he came in. He looked at the cleanser. The cleanser looked at him. There was a moment then that he would think about for the rest of his life. He would think about it in odd moments, washing a cup, fixing the solar fabric, sitting on the step at dawn. He would think about how long it lasted. He would decide, eventually, that it had lasted about 3 seconds. 3 seconds in which the cleanser looked at the tin of vor feed and the spoon, and looked at Cal and decided. 3 seconds in which a thing happened in the cleanser's mind that Cal would never have a word for, and the cleanser, perhaps, would never have a word for either. The cleanser said, "I see." It walked to the door. At the door it stopped and it turned and it said, in trade tongue, still very quietly, "The trace was wrong. I will report it so. We will not return." Cal did not speak. He did not nod. He did not, for that long moment, do anything except hold the rifle muzzle down and breathe. The cleanser made the formal farewell chord, the 3-note one. It went out. The two at the door followed it. The skimmers wound up. The dust rose, the rust color, 2 hours early. The skimmers lifted and they turned south and they were gone. He stood in the middle of the room for a long time. Then he locked the door. Then he went to the bed and he pulled the rug back and he lifted the panel and he said, "Alyssa." She came out slowly. Her arms were still folded in the asterisk gesture of having finished. She unfolded them, one set at a time, like a person waking from a long sleep, and the four eyes opened and she looked at him, and she made a sound he had not heard before, a low single note, sustained, a note that did not resolve, a note that was the vor equivalent, he would understand eventually, of weeping. He did not know what to do. He had never known what to do with weeping. He sat down on the floor beside her. He did not touch her. He did not know if a vor could be touched, in such a moment, by hands like his. He said, "It's all right. They're gone. It's all right." She made the single sustained note for a long time. Then she stopped. Then, in trade tongue, and he had not known she knew trade tongue. She had been listening, of course she had been listening. For 11 days, she said, in 3 voices at once, very quietly. Why? He did not know what she was asking. She said it again, why? He thought she was asking why he had hidden her, or why he had lied to the cleanser, or why he had said come with me in the ravine, or why any of it. He thought she might be asking why he had done a thing that, by all the logic of her people and most of the logic of his, he should not have done. He thought about it. He thought about it carefully, because he understood that he was going to be asked this question for the rest of his life, in one form or another, and he wanted to find the answer once and remember it. He said, because I could. She tilted her head. Because I could, he said again. Because I was there and you were there and I could. That's all. That's the whole of it. She was quiet. The 4 eyes worked over his face. Then she said in 3 voices, "It is enough." He nodded. "It is enough," she said again, and then more quietly, "For me, it is enough." They sat on the floor by the bed for a long time. The light moved across the high window. Somewhere very far away, the skimmers were a fading line in the southern sky, and the cleanser at the door was perhaps already composing the report that would say the trace was wrong, and the report would be filed, and the file would be closed, and the unsung would be marked as completed, and the carrion drones would receive their stand down, and the vor would go on with their day, and nobody at all on either side would ever know that a cleanser of the office of the quiet day had looked at a tin of vor feed and a vor-shaped spoon on a human's table, and had, for 3 seconds, decided. Cal would think about that for a long time, too. He would think about it on the day, 2 months later, when Alyssa stood beside him on the rim of the ravine where he had found her, and she did not close her eyes, and she pointed at the wall where her shadow had lain longest, and she made a chord that he understood without translation to mean, "That was the place I stopped being a thing." He would think about it on the day, a year later, when the second vor came, not a cleanser, but a young one, marked the way Alyssa had been marked, and she came not by accident but because she had heard, somehow, in the slow way news traveled between hive houses, that there was a place on a pale moon where the unsung were sometimes not. He would think about it on the day, 3 years later, when there were 6 of them in the shack and he had built an extension, and the extension was not enough, and he and Alyssa, and the young one whose chord name translated approximately as *Reed had gone to the outpost together, and IMO Vass had looked at the 3 of them on her porch and had set down her cigarette and said, "How many more, Renner?" And he had said, "I don't know." "As many as come," and IMO had nodded and said, "I'll make space." He would think about it on the day, 5 years later, when Alyssa stood in the long room of the new house. They had built a real house by then, of cut stone and salvaged steel, with a roof that did not flap, with a kitchen long enough for a brood table. And she sang the 4-note tune his mother used to hum slowly, with 3 voices, and the other vor in the room joined her on the long side down, and the sound was a sound he had not known the universe contained. And he had stood in the doorway with a dish towel over his shoulder and had not been able to move for a moment. And Alyssa had looked at him across the room and had made the gesture, the new one, the one she had taught the others. The one that meant, "I have heard you and I am here." And he had made it back, badly, with only 1 set of arms, but he had made it. He would think about it most, though on the day a vor ship came down on the Pale Flats, not a skimmer, a ship, big, slow, with the dark blue markings of the Council of Brood Mothers, and a delegation came down the ramp and walked across the flats to the house, and the lead brood mother was old, very old, and she walked with a stick that she did not need but that she carried because the gesture of carrying it was a gesture of being older than the people she was walking to, and she came up to the door and Cal opened it. And she looked at him and she said in trade tongue slowly, "We have been hearing of you, human." Cal said, "I see. We have come to ask a question." "All right. The question is whether you would speak to a council about the quiet day, about the unsung, about what is and is not enough." Cal stood in the doorway. He looked past the brood mother at the ship on the flats. He looked at the dust, which was the bone color, the morning color. He looked at the long line of his own shadow, which fell across the step in the shape of a tired man with a quarter-inch limp on his left side. Behind him, in the long room, Alyssa was at the brood table with the others. He could hear the three-note hum. He could hear the small sounds of bread being passed. He could hear the lamp. He said, "I'm not much of a speaker." The broodmother tilted her head, the same tilt, the listening one. She said, "We are not asking for a speaker. We are asking for the one who said, 'Come with me.'" He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "I'll come. Let me get my coat." He turned back into the house. Alyssa had stood up from the brood table. She was watching him from across the long room, and the four eyes were doing the thing they did when she was afraid, which had not changed in 5 years, 4 small doors closing in the same wind. She came to him quickly in the long underwater gate, and she stopped a pace away, and she said in 3 voices, very low, "Where?" "To a council," he said, "of theirs." She was silent, then she said, "Why?" "They want to talk." "About?" He looked at her. He thought about the ravine. He thought about the half-loaf of bread. He thought about 3 seconds at a doorway when a cleanser had looked at a tin and a spoon and had decided. He said, "About asterisk enough, about what it means." She was very still. Then she made the gesture, the new one. "I have heard you and I am here." She made it with all 4 arms, which she had begun to do in the past year when she meant it most. He made it back with 1 set of arms as best he could. He picked his coat off the hook. He put the flask in the chest pocket. The photograph had not been in the flask for 2 years. It lived now on a small shelf in the long room, in a frame Reed had carved out of salvage wood, beside a Vor photograph of a hive house Alyssa had been born in and would never see again, and a 3rd frame that was empty and would stay empty, because some things are best held by the shape of where they used to be. He went out onto the step. The broodmother was waiting. The pale flats stretched away in the bone-colored light. He stood for a moment on the step. He felt the wind come up off the flats and move through his coat. He thought about a long time ago, in a ravine, when he had sat down on a rock with a rifle beside him, and had spoken 2 words quietly to a folded shape against a western wall. He had not known, then, that the 2 words were the largest thing he would ever do. He did not know it now, either. He understood now that you almost never knew it at the time. That you said the small thing, the human thing, the "come with me," and you went on with your day, and the world went on with its day, and the largeness of it was not something you carried. It was something you put down gently, somewhere behind you and walked on from. He looked at the broodmother. He looked past her at the ship. He said, "All right, let's go." He went down the step. His bad hip complained. He did not apologize to it. He walked across the pale flats toward the ship, in the bone-colored light, with the old broodmother walking beside him slowly at his pace, because she had the kind of patience that takes a lifetime to learn, and because she understood, perhaps, what the small, slow thing was that they were doing together. Behind him, in the doorway of the long house, Alyssa stood with her 4 arms folded in the new pattern, and the wind moved her chitin softly, and her 4 eyes did not close. They watched him go. They did not look away.